My name's Luke Schenker.
I'm Eric Telmer.
And today we're going to talk to you guys about Bitcoins. Now, first off, what is a Bitcoin? A Bitcoin is a decentralized digital currency, sometimes referred to as cryptocurrency based on the nature of how transactions are made using cryptography. Now, this is primarily used online, it's anonymous, and is such a system that there is no trust involved between parties to know that the transaction is actually happening. Now, wait, wrong screen. Now, how do Bitcoins work? Each user has two keys. They have a public key and a private key. Their public key acts as their address. So if you want to send money to someone's Bitcoin account, you send it to essentially their public key. They use their private key to send money from their account. And they do so through using, next slide, sorry. They use digital signatures. Now, digital signatures enable the user to say, hey, I have this private key for this public address, and I don't have to show you the entire private key to know that I have it. So they use the message that they're making with the private key, and they can send that to the user, and then the person at the other end says, okay, I have your public key, I have your message, and I have your digital signature. I can verify that you have your private key without you explicitly showing it to me. Now, how the Bitcoin system works. It's interesting because they don't actually keep records of how much money you have in your account. Instead, they keep a massive ledger of every transaction that has ever occurred. And they calculate your balance by going through every transaction, saying, okay, you got money here, you spent money here, and through the entire history of Bitcoin, they find your total and how much you can spend. Now, transactions are through the ledger, which I previously mentioned, and they use the blockchain to properly order transactions to avoid cases of fraud or double spending or other malicious uses. Now, Eric's going to talk to you guys all about that.
So the first technicality in the Bitcoin system is the transaction ledger. So this is a massive ledger involving every single transaction in the Bitcoin system that has ever happened. And every node in the system has this ledger. So the way they validate that the user sending them the money actually has the money that they have is by going through the entire history of transactions and verifying that their balance, if you will, actually equals to a greater sum than what they're sending you. So this obviously would take forever, and this is why when you first install a Bitcoin wallet, it'll take up to a day to sync up with the entire system. This only needs to be done once, however, go through the whole thing, so then after that, the computational time is much less. And there's also a collection of unspent transactions, because each transaction is actually taking inputs, money that people have given to you, and then redistributing it. So every user has a pool of unspent transactions that have been given to them so that it becomes easier to check their balance without having to recompute the entire thing. Now the blockchain. The blockchain is probably the biggest technical feat of the Bitcoin system, so bear with me for a second. So the blockchain addresses the double spending issue, which arises when a user, let's say Alice, sends their money to Bob to try and buy a product, and then Bob ships out the product because he receives a valid digital signature and message, and that she actually does have the money. But then Alice takes those same Bitcoins and then tries to send them to Fred, but obviously this won't work because she's spending the same money twice. So in order to account for this, what most systems do, most centralized systems, is they'll have a server that takes the order of all the transactions as they come in and then just counts the first transaction as the valid one. However, in a decentralized system, it is involving the internet, it's really very hard to do this because the delay between nodes, so like if every node in the system will get each signal at a different time, so it's very, very hard to agree on which transaction happened first because of the delay by propagating through the internet. So this is where we get to the blockchain. Each block is a collection of transactions said to have happened at the same time, and then each block references the previous one. And that's what creates kind of this order of transactions, and that's how you know which one came before the other. And because of the reference to each previous block, this prevents hackers from trying to insert blocks, because then the reference to a previous block would be broken. Because each reference is related to the hash of the block, which means that the contents of the block can't be changed, or else you could check this hash and you would notice that they're not equal. Yeah. So to create a block, a user takes a collection of unconfirmed transactions, and then they pool them together and try and validate a block. To validate a block, a user takes this message, and then as the digital signature was taking the message and then hashing it with the user's private key, in this system, the user is taking the message and then hashing it with a random guess, and then guessing this number over and over until the resultant hash is less than a certain threshold. So this obviously, because of the nature of hash programs, there's no method about this. It's literally a guessing game. And so your average computer will take multiple years to validate each block. However, with all nodes in the system trying to validate a block at one time, usually a block will be solved every 10 minutes or so. So once a block is confirmed, it's added into the chain, and then its transactions that it contains are considered valid, and then any transactions that would come after it, like that tried to double spend the same money, would be considered invalid. However, sometimes two nodes will complete a block at the same time, and then that's when you have divergent branches on which path the blocks to agree on. And so the way this works is once a user finishes a block, it publishes it to the network, and then the rest of the network agrees that that block belongs in the chain. However, if two blocks are created at the same time, each node in the network will accept the first block that arrives to it and then continue working on that branch of the blockchain. And then once another block is validated and created onto a certain branch, that branch is then broadcasted out, and the rest of the network will agree on the branch that has the longest number of blocks. So in order to try and double spend, Alice, in this case, is the attacker, would have to get her first transaction sent to Bob, validated into the blockchain, and then try and create her own blockchain that is longer than the initial one that has her transactions being sent to Fred. Luckily, this is really, really hard because of the randomness and the impossibility of creating a blockchain. So for the first block only, Alice would only have a 50% chance of guessing that block before the rest of the network if she had 50% of the computational power of the entire network. So obviously, the chance of her creating a longer chain gets smaller and smaller as the chain itself, as the bottom one gets longer and longer, because then she would have to, in turn, create a longer and longer chain. So that's why users are advised to wait up to 6 hours, because then the chance that another longer chain could be inserted, and therefore making their transactions invalid, because once a longer chain is decided on, the shorter one will become invalid, and those transactions won't count anymore. The chance of an attacker being able to generate a long chain diminishes as time goes on. So to recap really quick, the transactions are validated by going through the history and checking the digital signatures with each message, and then the order of these transactions is validated by this computational race and the cryptographic hash function to ensure that attackers can't insert blocks and try and create their own history of the spending.
Nice. All right. So, security-wise, basically, whoever has an address's private key, as we said before, can reallocate funds within that account. The private key can be used to generate a new public key, thus generating new addresses, so you can always mix up where your account is, so it's very hard to keep track of where you are, helping with the anonymous nature of the service. And again, transaction ledger and blockchain make any attempts to alter or fabricate transactions. Nearly impossible. So the service itself is pretty secure. So really, we're looking at the only really feasible way to lose your money is from people stealing your private keys. Now, private keys and other user data that you use with the Bitcoin service is stored in your wallet. Now, there are 3 types of wallets. I'm going to talk about each one of them. So first off, well, the Bitcoin wallet contains, again, key pairs for the private key user address, which is your public key. It contains a list of your specific transactions, your preferences for using the application, and then other miscellaneous metadata. Now, the first kind is the software wallet, which is just a local application. You keep it on your computer. It keeps track of all those things. Your wallet is stored locally as a file, and the security is basically contingent on you making sure that no one gets into your computer to steal your wallet.data file. So if someone does, they have all your money, and you're done. The paper wallet, which is the one of the most secure versions of the wallet, is it works with the Bitcoin app for Android. It's interesting because the application stores your public key, which is your address, and it handles transactions in the ledger, but it doesn't store your private key. Your private key is stored physically on a QR code, which you keep with you, which is your kind of paper wallet. So whenever you want to send money to anyone, you scan the QR code. The phone then transmits your private key and does all the functionality for making the transaction without you actually having to store your private key, thus making it, if someone gets into your phone, there's no private key there anyways, so you're pretty safe. Now, the last kind of wallet, and this is the kind that really results in a lot of problems for the Bitcoin industry, is the web wallet. And this is the most convenient because you give a third-party control over your wallet, they manage your accounts, and they do everything, and they are responsible for the security of your wallet, which is bad news because it results in quite a few breaches. Now, 2 pretty notable ones are, first off, mybitcoin.com, which its shopping cart interface had a bug in it. And so an attacker went through that, got administrative privileges, and just started draining accounts because they had access to everybody's wallets. And so they had everyone's private keys. They just went at it. And since mybitcoin.com didn't have a very good reimbursement policy, they just tried to reimburse people, and they got up to 49%. But really, that's still a ton of money lost. So kind of a big deal. Now, Bitcoinica and Linode is another interesting case because Bitcoinica, it has actually been attacked multiple times and is out of business. But this particular attack was with their cloud service, Linode, which stored all of their data, public keys, all that. Someone hacked into the cloud server and then had access to everybody's accounts. And so all they did was they just did a search through everyone's files and looked for the keyword Bitcoin, found 8 particularly large accounts, and then just drained them. So, pretty big deal. Now, Bitcoins, since it's easy to transmit them, but very hard to get them back due to the anonymous nature of the users, scams are pretty big deal. One of the biggest ones is the Bitcoin Savings and Trust, in which a guy promised, if you gave him your Bitcoins, he promised 7% weekly interest, which, if you know anything about economics, that's basically impossible in any real-world economy. But a ton of people bought into this, gave them all their Bitcoins, and then turned out to be a Ponzi scheme. So everybody got pretty screwed. But on the good side is that guy went to jail because he didn't hide himself very well. Now, this other guy, Silk Road's Tony76, he got away with it. Now, he was a very prevalent drug dealer on Silk Road in the days when Silk Road was still functioning. And he had a large deal on April 20th to give discounts on a ton of his products. And everyone's just like, oh man, this guy's so trusted. Everyone starts buying his products, and then he just falls off the grid. He's gone. And since he also used Tor in conjunction with Bitcoins, it was impossible to find. So he got the big break. Now, what issues are we noticing with these breaches and scams? Well, as I said, it's nearly impossible to recover funds once they're stolen. Web exchanges typically do not have insurance policies. It's unlikely that they do. If you could find one, good for you. exchange companies easily pop up because it's such a growing service. Everyone wants to get into it. But at the same time, these companies are very new at what they're doing, and they require the same amount of security as a large bank because they're handling the same types of assets. But they're not prepared for that, so they easily come under attack. Now, these exchange companies, 45% of them typically fail due to this, so that's kind of a giant deal. And again, losing your wallet.data file means losing all your Bitcoins and you're out of luck. Now, that isn't to say that people are straying away from Bitcoins. There's problems, but people are still embracing it, and there are still companies popping up that use Bitcoins. For instance, there's a company that came out in the last year, bitcoinshop.us, which is essentially Amazon.com, but for Bitcoins. You can buy like electronics, books, whatever you could typically get on Amazon, but you pay for everything in Bitcoins. BitPay is also an interesting service because it's slightly like PayPal in that a company can opt to use BitPay for their service or website, and people can pay in Bitcoins, and then BitPay will translate that into actual funds like real currency that they can actually use. So that's opening the door a lot for smaller companies. Now, in addition, Reddit, Etsy, WordPress, and a bunch of other pretty substantial companies are beginning to legitimize Bitcoins by accepting them for different services. And Bitcoins are actually entering the physical realm because they're beginning to be used in Bitcoin ATMs. And they're actually getting physical Bitcoins, like one of which is I always have trouble with this, the Cassatius coins, which each one has an encoded private key with each coin, which you can then use to put that money into your virtual Bitcoin account, which is a pretty interesting concept. Now, I know you're all thinking, what about Silk Road? Wasn't Silk Road the real thing that kept the Bitcoin alive through illegal activity? Well, not really. Silk Road was a big player in illegal activity in Bitcoins, but that's like saying if eBay went down, internet commerce goes down, which is not the case. Bitcoin was a big player, but it wasn't everything. And as we noticed, the market decently quickly recovered after Silk Road's collapse. So what does, next one? Oh yeah. So even though Silk Road's gone, there's still a ton of illegal activity that's happening. Wait, go back to this. They're still readily able to get drugs, counterfeit bills, guns, illegally obtained electronics for massive discounts, credit card and PayPal accounts, hitmen, passports, basically anything you could want illegally is still there despite the Silk Road being gone. Now, the value of the Bitcoin as tracked by Mt. Gox, which is the biggest player in the transaction of Bitcoin's services and actual money. Over the past 4 years, they've been growing steadily until this past year, in which their growth has escalated, and it's a little erratic. But you notice that there's definitely a trend in the growth that they're still getting bigger, and Bitcoins are being more widely used. So despite the problems that Bitcoin is having, we're noticing that it's still a growing economy, and there are a lot of new prospects with the Bitcoin. I don't think we're going to see it going away anytime soon. And does anyone have any questions?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how does Bitcoin mining work?
So the validating of the blocks that I was talking about, that's what Bitcoin mining is. And whenever a node validates a block by guessing the random number, they get a Bitcoin deposited, or a certain amount of Bitcoins deposited into their account. And that's kind of how the Bitcoins will slowly be released into the market. But they will stop, I think the guess is...
I think it's every 4 years it depreciates until...
Soon, within the next, I think, 10 or 20 years, the Bitcoins will stop being released, and then it's assumed that a transaction fee will be applied to every transaction that needs to be validated into the blockchain, and then nodes will take the transactions that have the highest transaction fees and then validate those blocks and then receive the transaction fees that each transaction had with it. Yeah.
Shoot.
So because of the limited number of possible Bitcoins, it means that prices of inflationary currency, which is probably going to ruin it eventually. Is there any way of fixing
Well, that's not a gigantic issue because your transactions can get down to a millionth of a Bitcoin. So even though the Bitcoins will eventually, like, there will be less of them, you can break them up into such small fractions that they can still be a feasible currency because you can still make just smaller
But it's
amounts.
still inflationary, so the value still goes up.
Oh wait, no, it's
Yeah.
actually it's a deflationary.
Yeah, because and once you lose your private address, then the bitcoins associated with that private address will be lost forever. But there isn't, as of right now, there's no plan to, once they stop being released into the market, to re-release them.
Right.
Yes.
Can you go back to the slide?
Oh, it's this.
Oh yeah.
Oh wait, references.
So there, as you guys said, there was some pretty erratic movements and huge spikes and some huge drops. Do you attribute that to any particular thing, either in the news or?
That one particular event was when Mt. Gox specifically, and this actually resulted in a bunch of other companies having the same type of blip, but there was I think it was like a $5 million suit or something around that range that Mt. Gox got tangled in with because the U.S. was having some kind of issues accepting bitcoins and like translating that into real money, and that's what these companies do. So it was kind of just a legal issue, which is still actually being worked out pretty heavily because the FBI, after it seized all the assets from Silk Road, everyone knows what these assets are, and the FBI doesn't know whether to validate them and use them or to just like drop them, and it has to do something fast. Otherwise, based on the erratic nature of Bitcoin, it could depreciate. So there's actually a real issue with the government and how to really handle Bitcoin, which is a little extra than what you asked, but it's because I care.
So how do you reconcile the idea of the ATM with the fact that it might take up to 6 hours for someone to be safe recognizing an transaction?
That's a good question. The Bitcoin ATMs are relatively new, primarily popping up in like the UK, but it's a pretty experimental trend right now. So we're not really sure how it's going to work out. But
Obviously, they're producing bitcoins, they're not producing British pounds or anything like that because the rate will change all the time. Right?
yeah,
Yeah, that definitely is a concern,
but
for sure.
it's going to have to watch it. See what happens.
So thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah.